you'll see that there is a chat box, so you can chat to the panelists and we will be collecting your questions throughout. So please don't hesitate. And we will address questions at the end of the webinar and we'll see all of those. So to continue, I would like to give a few acknowledgements. This report is really a collective effort. We are so grateful to the W. Clement and Jesse V. Stone Foundation, who made this report possible. In addition, all of the educators across our network of schools, as well as staff from Internationals Network and our research advisory board, all contributed to the creation of this report. So we are a collaborative group, and this the report and the findings are really a product of collaboration. So as Joe said, Internationals Network, we are the only school development and support organization that focuses on immigrant multilingual learners. We've become a leading voice in the national fight for educational equity and in the education of immigrant and refugee youth. We seek to educate immigrant and refugee multilingual learners by supporting educators in our schools and districts to better serve those students. And we have a multifaceted model that addresses instruction, language development, social emotional learning, and linguistic needs. And really, we focus on supporting educators to innovate in how they serve these students. We design new schools. As mentioned, we are launching 2 new schools in the fall, and we support teachers and school staff and provide access to a collaborative, a robust network of shared learning for our partners. So our schools are designed so that all the structures reinforce learning and support for learners and really reinforce professional learning. You'll hear talk of professional development, or PD as we refer to it. And we foster an equity-focused, linguistically and culturally responsive school environment. The result from our schools is that our students tend to be more successful than their counterparts at schools outside the network. We see them graduating at higher rates. We see them coming back to us and telling them they feel prepared for the post-secondary pathways. We see them enrolling at college in higher rates. So what you'll see in the examples that follow are examples of what has happened throughout these past 15 months growing out of our network of schools. These are the schools and academies in our network. Some are standalone schools. Some are school within a school models that we refer to as academies. 28 now, soon to be 30, where we will be opening schools in academies in Passaic, New Jersey, and Los Angeles Unified School District in the fall. So before we launch into our findings, we want to get a sense of who's here in the room. Joe mentioned we're crossing geographies and time zones and continents. You'll see a poll. Just select one. What is your role in the education of multilingual learners? So we'll give you a minute to vote or select, even though you may play multiple roles. So you can just click on one and okay, I think we can close the poll now and share the results. Okay, we have quite a mix of folks. So community partners and teachers and students and parents. So everyone in all roles across our school is represented. We're here in the Northeast in the Eastern time zone, but we have representation from across the country. So thank you. So I'm going to pass it back to Joe to speak a bit to the significance of this report.
Thanks, Marguerite. In a moment, Marguerite and some of my colleagues will be sharing some of the findings from our experiences and our analysis of the past year plus of remote and hybrid learning. I want to just give a little bit more context for what you're going to hear today and what you'll read in the report. We did this study because we thought it was really important to take stock of this past year and think more deeply about how we can come back stronger and more prepared to re-engage with our students and renew our relationships with them and their families in the year ahead. As we all know, the past year has been full of loss. And as we acknowledge that loss, we also wanted to take some time to reflect and to shine some light on some of the ideas and, yes, even some innovations that have emerged as a result of the efforts by a lot of very creative and dedicated staff and the amazing young people in our schools. So this report really represents those experiences of many people in our schools where people on the ground were really forced to figure out and to make some changes incredibly quickly. We hope that policy discussions and decisions will be informed by what has been happening in schools. And our hope is that this report will be a contribution towards helping to make some sense out of what's happened over the past year plus. And then lastly, I just want to acknowledge that this has, as Marguerite said, truly been a collaborative effort by our staff, our school district community partners. We have learned alongside them over the past year, and more than ever, we have tapped into the collective strength and the experience of our network. And so this report and this discussion today is really reflective of that learning journey that we've all made together. So I will see you all later during the Q&A, and I'm turning back to Marguerite.
Thanks, Joe. So what you'll experience in the coming minutes is an overview of findings. As I said, the report you'll get in depth, and you'll see examples from every district in which we're engaged in, every school and academy across the network. You'll see some data, some voices. How we envision you engaging with the information that we're sharing with you is as follows. We want you to, as you hear and read and listen to these findings, we want you to think about your own school community, your district, your classroom, your organization. What was going on in your experience during these past 15 months? Does what we're sharing and the examples reflect your experience? Is it counter to your experience? What's new and interesting to you? What examples and ideas raise questions for you? And what ideas could you take back to your own setting to take action or to influence the preparations for the year to come? So we're going to post those questions in the chat for you to think about. So I guess put on your seatbelts, put on your thinking caps, and we'll launch in. I want to start by talking a little bit about pre-existing challenges. Across Internationals Network, we're aware that our students face intersecting challenges even without a pandemic exacerbating those. That includes xenophobia, racism, structural exclusion. And in our work, ever with an eye towards equity, we know that with the right resources and the right supports, our students thrive. We see that in our schools. We know that given the opportunities to collaborate, to have a voice in their own learning, to engage in rigorous projects that have an authentic purpose, we see them meet and exceed and really face the challenges that are facing them. What we've learned is that when we remove the barriers that are placed in them, often in schools, that the immigrant multilingual learners succeed. Now we would like you to think for a minute about your own context, and we're going to launch another poll for you briefly. Think about these past 15 months, your own setting, your multilingual learners. What are the greatest challenges that your multilingual learners have faced? So my colleagues are gonna launch poll number 2, which I hope is gonna come up on the screen. Here we go. So what's the greatest challenge? I know it's hard to pick one, but we're going to give you a minute to pick what you'd say is the greatest challenge your students faced in participating in school in the past 15 months. Okay, I think we can close the poll and show the results. Okay. So the top two choices we're seeing: trauma, stress, and mental health challenges. We'll talk about that a bit, and lack of technology or internet access. And we're touching on all the other challenges as well. Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing. So on to the report. You'll see on the screen a quote from an Internationals Network principal from near the start of the pandemic in the spring of 2020. As one school leader put it succinctly, dealing with the impacts of the pandemic meant going into overdrive in terms of our concern for students. We all know, everyone here engaged on this webinar knows that the challenges have been great. And as Joe mentioned, we believe it's imperative to couple the conversation about loss and trauma and the challenges with illuminating the innovations. And much of the work that we've seen unfold over this past year has been possible due to the dedication, creativity, and the flexibility of folks in our network of educators and students and families. In pivoting to remote learning, we know that everyone was caught off guard. No one was prepared by the shift to remote school in terms of a number of things, in terms of technology skills, knowing how to teach online, having access to the technology and the broadband, the available hard and software. But also what caught us off guard was not having the expertise to know how to create culturally and linguistically responsive instruction in an online setting. We know how to do that in a classroom, but doing that online was entirely new. As this quote illustrates, we were all essentially reinventing school, and often with very little direction or support in doing so. For students, there was a lot to say. They had a lot to tell us over the past 15 months about what was challenging. Among things, the lack of social interaction, the isolation, troubleshooting, technology, the distractions at home, trauma, concerns that they have that emerged, the pressure to work. For school leaders, remote learning in the midst of a pandemic has meant constant shifts. It's meant ongoing uncertainty. It's also meant holding and supporting the anxiety and the trauma of staff amidst loss, of students and families during the height of the pandemic, and also throughout many shifts in academic policy and scheduling. And we'll say a little bit more about that in a few moments. One of our primary findings was enrollment. We saw from the hard numbers that we have, we saw a decline in enrollment across the board, across the network. Most markedly, a decline in the number of entering ninth graders in our schools. We attribute this to a couple of factors, both the pandemic, but also the lingering effects of xenophobia and the stringent immigration policies from the last administration. The phenomenon of lower enrollment is not unique to one district. This is something that we've seen and has been written about across the US. And really, regarding the year ahead, we're left with this question of, will the students come back? What's going to happen? Will we see this trend in the year ahead? What are the implications for school funding? So there's a lot of question marks as we go into the coming year. What we saw in addition is a marked rise in the number of students working and also in the number of hours students were working for students who were already employed. Many students' families working in the service industries were devastated by loss of jobs, and students were forced to step up and be more engaged in the labor force. And this is a ripple effect that we've seen throughout the network. And it really impacted every school and academy in the network. In terms of addressing the challenge of working student schedules, we saw a great deal of innovation. Schools responded to these demands on students' time in a number of ways. Alexandria City Public High School was written up in the Washington Post. We're going to share the link in the chat for you in an article. They created, in a collaborative effort with the school board and students and families and staff at the school, they created a night school so that students could attend at night because they were not able to attend during the day, an innovation that was made possible by flexibilities in academic policy. Another example, it was at Brooklyn International High School in the spring of 2020. There was a shift to a one subject per day schedule, which really enabled students to focus and be more effective. And of course, these schedules have evolved as policies have changed and as we've learned, in the process of building the plane, we've learned how to fly it better. The ability to be flexible in scheduling and policy really pushed these innovations forward. Another example is at the International High School at Langley Park in Prince George's County, Maryland. Leaders and staff created a block schedule that had 4 days of synchronous instruction and 1 day of asynchronous instruction, which they called the office hour day. And that on that day, students had an advisory and tailored classes, and it really enabled one-on-one support to happen for students. And really, our takeaways from these innovations and these flexibilities is that sometimes the barrier in and of itself is the school schedule. So the ability to be creative and adapt the schedule to meet students' real needs on the ground is imperative. And sometimes we have broad assumptions about what school is supposed to look like, and maybe we need to rethink those. And what can we learn moving forward from these shifts and innovations? And again, this flexibility, the ability to be flexible, was very helpful to us. So I'm gonna to talk about systems of attendance. Attendance suffered, and to talk about how schools responded to this in their systems is my colleague, Dennis de Guzman Gaindek. And I'm going to stop sharing so you can see him.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Marguerite. Dennis Gaindek. I am the Director of School Support for Internationals Network for New York. Just to kind of share a little bit of what we've done in terms of highlighting some of the attendance issues that were going on. In New York City, there was a policy around what types of codes would needed to be inputted when thinking about in-person learning, whether they're present or absent, and then also during remote setting, whether they're present or absent. And so in thinking about those conversations and thinking about how do schools take attendance. I mean, the mere fact of attendance taking is typically not something that we really focus on or really pay attention to as much, but it became a much more heavy lift in many ways because systems and structures needed to be put in place. And so in terms of being able to look at attendance, there were a couple of things worth noting. So during remote and hybrid learning, it really involves so much more than just seeing kids physically in the building or just seeing them be on the remote classroom. It involved a host of actors. It was really a prime example of like, it really takes a village to come together and really help support the students be able to, one, access school, but also be able to keep them safe. So a lot of the work was really about the community learning together and how they were kind of gonna figure out the processes that would work for them and their community. So in the case study that is being shared by Marguerite, what we really tried to look at is thinking about the absence of some structure that really works for the community and how it could create a chain reaction that will involve multiple educators and multiple people in the school. So there were new systems that need to be set up. Fortunately, a lot of our schools are set up in a way that already promotes cohorting students in a way that groups of teachers are responsible for that cohort of students, and there's certain support staff that are supporting specific groups. And so there's a level of specificity that schools almost needed to really dive into in terms of being able to capture attendance well, but also thinking about how it could really, how the system might not work if things fall apart, meaning like if there's gaps in those systems, you needed to really tweak it along the way. So there was a lot of iteration that was happening. The structures that are in place was really critical in that they were impacting the outcomes in terms of like the attendance numbers that they were producing. So as you could see in the case study, when you look at step by step what different schools were doing, right, there were certain pieces that felt really detailed, but there's also certain pieces that felt like, well, who is in charge of this? Like what's happening between this step and this step? So it was those little details that really helped either support the attendance taking or actually hinder it from actually creating the outcomes. So that said, I'm going to kind of like leave, if you have any questions about that specific case study, or like just looking at the different systems and structures that were in place for various schools, shoot the Q&A and we'll be happy to answer it at the end of the talk.
Thanks very much, Dennis. Thank you. Back to the slides. So we talked about enrollment, we talked about attendance. What we also saw was enrollment in college for recent graduates dropping. This is a trend that has been documented nationally over the past couple of years. We did see that our students, our seniors, our graduating seniors, college enrollment was still higher than among graduates of similar backgrounds from low-income urban schools. But what we saw, usually about 70% of international network graduates enroll in college. And over the past few years, we saw a class of 2019, the data you see here presented, about 57% enrolled. And then from this past graduating class 2020, a little less than 50% enrolls. In our schools, there exist ample supports for post-secondary readiness. This include engagement of alumni, mentoring, supports that start in 9th grade, including advisory, one-on-one college guidance. So there's a lot of partnerships with community organizations that are very key to our post-secondary work. And even with all those things in place, the enrollment in college is dropping. And students may need and want to postpone college for a number of reasons, and we'll see. We have questions about the years ahead and what the long-term impacts of the pandemic will be on post-secondary pathways of students. So students, I mentioned students told us a lot. Students reported to us that stress, anxiety, distractions, family responsibilities, including working, were among the greatest obstacles to virtual learning. We know this through the fine work of our colleagues. This screenshot on the left is from a project that was launched by our New York City Professional Development Committee. So teachers from across schools that have recently formed a student voice and leadership subcommittee and engaged students in a project where they gathered data from among their peers about the realities, what they were experiencing in schools. This committee has launched a number of student-run events in recent years, including 2 events titled "What I Wish My Teachers Knew About Me," that have really helped teachers and staff throughout our network of schools learn about students' realities, not just their own students in the classroom, but across other schools. So that's been really powerful in hearing, really incorporating students' voices into our learning. In addition, this example, screenshot on the lower right, from International High School at Langley Park, again, in Prince George's County, the 2 social workers had a pre-existing partnership with University of Maryland social work program, and they really ramped up this partnership, and during remote learning were able to take on 7 interns, and this gave them the ability to set up tailored groups for students so that every single student in the school was able to get one-on-one support, was able to attend a support group. So really this rise in stress and anxiety could be offset by really expert professional support from folks who were being trained and learning how to work with immigrant students and families directly and address the realities that they were facing. So 2 exciting innovations. I'm going to pass the word over to Jackie Villain, the principal of International High School at LaGuardia, who's going to talk a little bit about partnering with families. And I'm going to stop sharing so that you can see her.
Thank you. So a couple things that I'll walk us through is from initially when we stopped physical school here in New York City and we went remote. And we've kept this system up actually all throughout. So throughout the spring last year and then also throughout this year, we focused on communication with students and then with families. And so our teachers are the main point of contact for our students. And then our support staff are the main point of contact for our families. And our thinking in what we did was that we wanted to not overload parents and kids with a lot of communication. We didn't want like general emails going out when we could have it be more personalized. And we didn't want robocalls going out when we could have someone pick up the phone and talk to them in their native language, or figure out what was the best way to communicate with the family. So we had each support staff have a small number of families that they continued weekly to check in with. And then our teachers took on a small number of their students, and already we're potted together in a small group of teachers with a small group of students. We have about 5 teachers with 75 students throughout the year. But within that, then each teacher took a smaller chunk of students that were their kids to check in with. And then weekly they checked in. With our parents and students, it could be text, it could be WhatsApp, it could be calls, it could be at a specific time, knowing that the family or the student is working at other times. With kids, it could also be Facebook, it could be Snapchat, it could be Instagram. It's whatever was the best way to get in touch with the people that we were getting in touch with, and always making sure that we were in their native language, especially for our parents, was a priority. We also worked with our CBOs from the beginning of last year to prioritize our support for our families. So when we were talking with families, we were almost never actually in the beginning talking about academics. We were almost always talking about the other needs that they had, where they could get food, if they were eligible for specific supports for PEBT, burial assistance, looking for job support, training programs, therapy services for the family. Those were the main things that we were communicating with families about. Secondarily, we were talking about academics. So underlying all of our plan was really getting to know our students and our families this year. Also, that being the priority, especially that we had a new group of ninth graders this year. We're a high school. And so our ninth graders this year, many of them haven't been to the building the entire year. So carrying through the plan that we had last year into this year, and having a point person for each student and for each family, really knowing them well, was a priority for us. And realizing that it's a collective effort. This is not going to be any one person's role, and it shouldn't be. It should be the entire community of us here at school reaching out to the community that we serve, our parents and students. We did some fun things with kids throughout the year to build community virtually. We did a virtual student lounge. We have a physical student lounge here in the building, but about 90% of our students were remote for most of the year. So we did a virtual student lounge, planning really just unstructured time where kids could relax together and have fun. We did a virtual art show with students. It was beautiful. We did many virtual game nights. On Friday afternoons, we got together and went into breakout rooms on Zoom and just played games, teachers and students. And so looking into next year, what we're doing is trying to do things starting this summer with our ninth graders that are coming in now for next year, plus our 10th graders who are our ninth graders this year, because many of them still haven't been to our building for any substantial amount of time. And we have a pretty robust summer program planned. We have a mural project that's going to be going on, painting the front of our building, and a New York City Explorers program that students are doing, just fun things to get students here in school and then even out on trips where they're having fun. And looking into next year, we are focusing on, for the first 2 weeks, definitely for the first 2 weeks, but carrying through throughout the whole year. But for the first 2 weeks, starting with who we are, who are our students, getting to know each other. We're filling the space with our identity so that we can then feel connected to the space that we're sharing.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you for sharing. So again, post your questions in the chat. I am going to go back and share my screen again. Here we go. Thank you. So Jackie mentioned a host of things that are going on at her school, and similar things are happening across the network. In the course of the past 15 months, we're also super aware that school leaders' duties shifted. Part of this has been, thinking about the heavy logistical burden that ate into time. Things are changing, but this is something we want to be aware of for the year ahead. Some leaders talked about the challenge of this pivoting and how it reduced their opportunities to take the pulse of the school. I'm going to share, I wanted to mention many of our, as you saw, our schools are across the country. Some schools have already concluded, some districts have already concluded for the year. Graduations, our next speaker is coming from graduation directly. Verena, who is going to speak, this is a video that I'm going to show, was not able to be here today because New York City is in the midst of graduation week. So I'm going to share a video, hopefully with the cooperation of the broadband. Now.
Hello, my name is Verena Cabarcas. I am the principal of International Community High School. I'm here with you to express how grateful I am to be a principal within the International's Network for Public Schools. We've always been leading schools that are innovative, responsive to students and families, and consistently accelerating learning. In addition, for this year, for this COVID year, I'm also appreciative of the flexibilities that we were given by the city and by the state in order to support our students and our families, especially because our attention was redirected to all the different COVID-19 protocols. We needed to spend time not just on all of the mandated documentation, reporting, and schedule fixing, but we also needed to tend to the social, emotional needs of our students, our families, and our staff. Given that COVID-19 will continue, and we're eagerly looking to figure out how to create more time for instruction, it is my hope that these flexibilities will continue until we are past this COVID-19 experience. So with that, I just highly suggest that there be lots of advocacy for continued flexibilities, so that way principals who have so much more additional work in these times can also afford to redirect our energies back into instruction where our students really need us to focus on. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to pivot for a moment to our colleague, Khalud Kameh, social studies ESL teacher from Manhattan International High School, who is going to talk to us also about innovations in adult learning opportunities that were created in collaboration with students to address trauma and social emotional needs. So I'm going to stop share so we can see Khalud.
Thanks, Marguerite. Yeah, we just had our graduation today, which was really exciting, and it was nice to see the students on this really important day. As Marguerite said, I am a 10th and 11th grade social studies teacher at the Manhattan International High School. I'm also a member of the Professional Development Committee, or PD committee, and I have been, I think, for the past 4 or 5 years or so. And through this committee, we've really had a space for teachers to come together across different schools and co-create learning opportunities for us teachers. And we've also been doing more and more work with including student voice over the years, as well as collaborative intervisitations, which has been really exciting. And this has become even more important with the pandemic. So we were able to pretty seamlessly shift from doing our work monthly in person downtown to the remote world, thanks to our fearless facilitator, Dolan, and the rest of the team, of course. And this year, our intervisitation PD focused on trauma. And we called our PD Exploring Trauma Awareness in the Classroom. I developed it along with my colleague, RM Kang, but we definitely did not develop this alone. And I think that this is such an important thing to highlight. We as educators, we as adults, as stakeholders, all needed space and time to process, to brainstorm, to share what trauma awareness means for us, what it looks like to be able to safely ask questions, to share practices, and to think about what the last year and a half has been, and also our thoughts on the future. We talked about our students. We also talked about ourselves. We talked about secondary trauma, empathic distress, and compassion fatigue. So as I mentioned, we didn't develop this alone. We tapped into our greatest resources, first and foremost, our students. So we made sure to include student voice by interviewing them and then confidentially sharing their thoughts, their ideas, their experiences in the work, which really recentered us because ultimately they are the ones we serve. We have no job if we have no students. But we also decided to tap into another great resource, which is our amazing support staff, in particular our social worker. And she was so instrumental in guiding us to really craft our own understanding of what trauma awareness means. And then kind of getting the ball rolling on trauma awareness, a group of us teachers at Manhattan International attended the International's leadership retreat. And from there, we created an ad hoc committee called Community Wellbeing. And our aim is to address trauma awareness and SEL in our school, in our communities, and to also examine the intersection of that with culturally responsive and sustaining education, because this is an ongoing, iterative, recursive process. Again, we needed the space, time, and most importantly, trust between everyone, educators, administration, and our whole network. And then finally, I just really, again, want to highlight that it was so important that we organically create this and engage all stakeholders, because by listening and learning, we could more meaningfully operationalize for the coming year, especially before we go off for the summer. So what we do, what we learn, what we hear, we bring back to our communities of learning, school-wide, network-wide, but most importantly in our classrooms. So that's just kind of the takeaway here. Thank you, Marguerite, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Khulud. Thank you for sharing your work and the work of the committee. I'm going to go back and share my screen again, and I want to talk about one more example, which is projects. Projects have always been and are front and center in the work of International's network schools and academies to engage students and enable them to develop their language skills, to explore the content, and to give them opportunities to create grade level work, academically rigorous work for real purposes. One example that's not listed here on the screen, but that I want to talk about and we can post in the chat is one product from one teacher from an ongoing working group among teachers across the network, the Home Language Working Group. Teacher Johnny Ware designed a project called Creativity for Social Change. This gave students in his senior English class the opportunity to explore a text and how the connection of a book by Octavia Butler, Parable of the Sower, and how that could address social issues. So there's an example which we can post in the chat that describes the project. What I want to highlight here is that because International's network schools put a great deal of emphasis on students using all the tools in their toolbox, at each point in the creative process, students had the opportunity to use all of their language skills. So they come in with rich linguistic repertoires. They could bring in resources from their home language to share with classmates, and also to provide them the opportunity to be at the helm of their own learning. So they could make linguistic choices that encourage them to process information in all the languages available to them and to make strategic language choices while producing their final project based on their own learning and the intended audience. So that's one example. Another example that I want to share with you is something that we also shared on social media. It's a project that was completed at Flushing International High School. Students wrote essentially I am texts, and this is one. They then recorded them on video and shared them publicly, and I'm going to share this one. I am you how, and I hope my sound is sharing as well.
I am Yuhao. I am student and the son. I wonder if I will ever get wealthy. I wonder if my future includes the people I love. I wonder if I will become the one I want to be. I pretend I'm an outgoing person. I believe hard work makes a better future. I hear the breeze blows through the noisy city. I am Yuhao. I worry about everything. I cry when nobody cares about me. I would never travel by myself. I have doubt about my future. I understand that everything is going to work as you believe. I am Yuhao. I see raindrop dropping from the sky and hit on the ground. I say no again. no pay. I want to make a lot of money. I hope the people I care about could always be happy. I dream to have a wonderful family. I try to build a better future. I am Yu Hao.
So I want to transition us, before we share our recommendations with you, I want to transition us into the last poll. And we want to pose a question for you. What's top of mind for you and your colleagues as you plan for the year ahead? We know there are a lot of things top of mind. We have limited choices here, but take a look at some of these choices and pick which one of these is top of mind for you. So we'll give you a minute. Okay, we're gonna close the poll and share the results. So we have the most top of mind engaging students who have struggled to attend school. But we also see there's really shared concerns across the attendees that are here. So what I'd like to do with that, as we think about that, I'm gonna close the poll and introduce our recommendations. The report, which you'll get in a few minutes, is shares 10 recommendations. And again, these have come out of our reflection on our work and analysis from the past 15 months. Our goal is to share what we at Internationals are thinking about, and what we think everyone should be thinking about as we head towards the opening of school. And hopefully what we've shown and shared balances the conversation about learning loss. What we want, how we want you to engage with these recommendations. We're essentially going to go through the 10 recommendations and read them for you. As you hear them and read them, we'd like you to reflect. Think about, how does each recommendation connect with your own work? And additionally, who would you need to engage with in your school, in your district, in your community, in order to take action on this recommendation? What concrete steps would you need to take? So we're going to post those questions for you in the chat. Again, we invite you to write any questions in the chat. You might want to take notes for yourself. We're going to leave you with your own process, but please, think about these and please keep posing questions for us. So I'll lead into the recommendations. The first one, center equity in recognition that some students have been more negatively impacted by the pandemic and remote learning than others.
The second recommendation is encourage school level innovation and cross-school collaborations by creating intentional opportunities for adult learning.
Number 3, encourage and allow for scheduling flexibilities to ensure that all students are served.
Fourth recommendation is promote and support competency-based learning and performance assessment that de-emphasizes seat time, but ensures access to rigorous learning experiences and higher order thinking for all students.
Number 5, use multiple forms of assessment to inform instruction on an ongoing basis rather than overly relying on infrequent standardized assessments.
Number 6, foster collective responsibility for students to promote student success and address social emotional needs and trauma.
Number 7, maintain meaningful, culturally and linguistically informed engagement with families.
Number 8, to ensure equity to support students and families with greatest needs, provide flexibility in funding and how to use it by prioritizing the input and decisions of those who know students and families best.
Number 9, target resources to attend to trauma-informed practices and improve mental health of students, families, and staff.
And number 10, continue to incorporate target opportunities for asynchronous learning in ways that are meaningful, accessible, and promote equity for diverse learners.
So we are going to shift into the Q&A time. And I'm going to pass it over to Joe to lead us off.
We've been trying to organize the questions out of the Q&A, so we're going to go for a few more minutes. So if there's any other, feel free to add. I'm going to try to answer 2 that I can do quickly, and then I'm going to kick 2 questions over to Jackie Villain. There was an earlier question, just to make sure the answer is seen by everybody, about this is being recorded, so that will be sent out afterwards for anyone who's either missed part of it or if you want to share. There will be a link. There was a question about is student attendance in Internationals Network schools covered by so-called student-based budgeting? Like in my school district, our schools are located in a number of districts and are funded in the same way that any other school in that same district is funded. So I know that that varies quite a bit, but whatever parameters or constraints are put on per pupil funding and how that may or may not be tied to attendance is the same in our schools as it would be in any school in that respective district. So I just want to try to address that a little. I'm going to 2 questions over to Jackie. Jackie, the first one, did teachers and support staff have an opportunity to share experiences about students and families to align what they were hearing from each?
Yeah, so our support staff had a weekly Monday morning call with me and the AP. We met on Zoom each week, and we shared questions that families were asking us. We talked about the needs that families were reaching out to us with. We ended up also putting together actually a website based on the feedback from parents, because we were getting the same questions from them. So we put together a website with food resources, with health information, and with a couple of other things that we were getting with rent assistance and housing support. because we were getting the same questions from our families. So when support staff then made their weekly calls, we would go over like the updates to that website each week. And for teachers with students, they met already in their schedule weekly. They met on the team. So they would go through and talk about the issues that students were raising to them and the concerns and what they were working on with students, so that the teachers of the classes would be able to know what was going on with each kid.
And Jackie, another one which you may have, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but the other question was, will, and Khalid, feel free to jump into if you have anything to add to this, but will your IHS continue the model of pod communication, and how would you refine it based on the past year? If either of you want to jump in.
Yeah, I can say, so we do something like that for our 10th graders and 12th graders right now. We do mentoring, and it's year long, and it's about 10 to 12 kids for each teacher. So we are thinking about how to do that though with our 9th and 11th graders. We've had in the past sometimes teachers to sign up for specific kids, and so we're thinking about if we want to do something a little more structured, like have a time in the day where it's like mentoring time, and then not only are the 10th graders and 12th graders going, but also the 9th graders and the 11th graders. So we're thinking about it, but we don't have anything completely set yet for our 9th and 11th graders.
I can add on to that. At Manhattan International, we have, this year we had advisory. Well, we've had it in the past as well, but it became particularly important with the pandemic. And we have 4 teaching teams. So each teaching team approached it differently because again, every team has their strengths, and we all played on those strengths. We're actually in the process right now, our committee, community well-being, in surveying teachers. And then we also want to get feedback from students on what worked, what didn't work, how can we revisit advisory, and what can it look like next year, especially as we get more information with what next year will look like. But we're trying to prioritize this because pods or smaller group opportunities for communication, especially more freely, really, really helps. So that's the hope.
There was another question about how can we partner with LEAs to be the answer. And I just wanted to, if anyone else wants to add, I want to just add a quick comment about that. I think as you've heard from what's in the report and also from some of the people that have spoken, this work has been done with a tremendous amount of collaboration, both within the school, but also with families and with organizations outside the school. I think our schools realize that in order to do this work in a really meaningful and deep way, a school can't do it alone. So it means working with your district partners, it means working with families, it means working with community partners, and not isolating the school and trying to figure out all the answers on your own. I think that's been particularly true this past year because so much of a burden has been was put back on schools, and schools really have had to figure out a lot of things on their own this year. And I think the external partnerships, and as we've talked about, I think the power of networks, for us, the ability to bring people together across schools and across the network has been really critical at a time when, frankly, there were things that nobody knew the answer to, and we all had to get together and try to figure that out. Anybody else want to add? I'm going to do one last check of the Q&A. Okay, Marguerite, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Okay, I want to say thank you to everyone for attending, for sharing your thoughts. We posted a form. We'll post it again in the chat. We'd love your feedback. If you have follow-up questions. Thank you so much to all of my colleagues here and their thoughts. We we have a lot to say, and we are very excited to share the report with you. I am posting the link. The report should be public now in the chat. I'll share my screen as well, so you could see. Oops, here we go. We're so grateful. We're grateful to the Stone Foundation, as said, and everyone who collaborated on the report, all the educators across our network. I want to also remind you that on July 14th, we will be hosting a panel discussion with district partners from LA Unified, Oakland Unified School District, Alexandria City School District, and New York City Public Schools, to talk about preparing for the year ahead and implications for re-engaging with learners. So we would love to see you there on July 14th for an hour. We're excited to share the report with you, and thank you for being with us this afternoon.